Ever since we exchanged vows, my husband, a classic mama's boy, had been noticeably absent from household chores. His dependence on me became painfully clear when I mentioned an upcoming business trip. Panic set in as he exclaimed, "Who will take care of me while you're gone?" After a heated argument, I left for my week-long journey. When I returned, I found a note next to completed divorce papers. It read, "Since you abandoned the housework, I'm going back to my parents. Consider the divorce papers and think it over." Rage boiled inside me at his audacity to threaten divorce, but as I calmed down, I began to see a glimmer of clarity. Perhaps this was the push I needed. Maybe a divorce wasn't such a bad idea after all. Resolved, I filed the papers the very next day. The following morning, my astonished husband stormed in, demanding to know where the divorce papers were. When I told him I had filed them, he broke down, utterly baffled and crying uncontrollably. "My name is Grace, and at 32 years old, I've been married just over a year. After college, I diligently climbed the ranks at a prominent company. Approaching my 30s without a romantic partner, my parents pressured me to settle down, leading me to reluctantly join a dating agency. That's where I met Edward, a soft-spoken man a few years younger than me who worked at a mixed firm. We connected over several dates, and his respectful demeanor made me think he was the one. When he proposed, I was overjoyed, envisioning a life together. However, our marriage unveiled challenges I hadn't anticipated. After our engagement, during a visit to my parents, they impressed upon us that marriage is a lifelong commitment. "Grace, always be there for Edward," they advised, and I nodded while Edward listened intently. Next, we visited Edward's parents. His father, Arthur, welcomed me warmly, saying, "I've heard so much about you from my boy. It's great to finally meet you." His mother, Michelle, was more reserved, scrutinizing me before asking, "Is this the one?" Edward confidently replied, "Yep, Mommy, I want to marry her." I was taken aback by his use of Mommy and Michelle's bluntness. Arthur quickly stepped in, apologizing for her directness and assuring me, "We're very happy about your marriage, but just so you know, Edward has had it pretty easy here. He might be a bit of a challenge." I reassured them, "I adore Edward's gentle side, and I know we'll support each other." Arthur turned to Edward, urging him to step up and keep me happy. Edward nodded earnestly, and not long after, we celebrated our union with a low-key wedding. To our delight, my parents gifted us a condo, marking the beginning of our married life. However, it soon became evident that Edward was unaccustomed to household responsibilities. One morning, while I was busy with laundry and preparing breakfast, Edward's alarm rang at 8, yet he continued to sleep soundly. Despite my efforts to wake him, he wouldn't budge. Finally, I pulled off his covers and gave him a gentle shake. Slowly, he opened his eyes, groggily exclaiming, "Wow, it's 8:10 already. Why didn't you wake me up?" I reminded him that I had tried and that his alarm was blaring too. "Now please eat your breakfast." As he rubbed his eyes and shuffled to the table, he immediately complained about the eggs. "Hey Grace, this egg is too runny. I can't eat this unless it's well done. Make it over," he demanded, caught off guard while I hung laundry. I struggled to hold back my irritation and snapped, "Then don't eat it. Why would you say that? And this coffee is scorching hot. Mommy always got the eggs and coffee just right." All right, I sighed, quickly redoing the eggs and letting the coffee cool. He ate hurriedly, leaving his plate on the table as he rushed toward the restroom. "Wait up, you know you should clean up after yourself." I called after him, but he dismissed my concerns. "Gee, I'm short on time." Annoyed, I paused my makeup routine to clean the dishes while picking out my outfit. Then he called out again, "Grace, over here. Help with my tie." There he stood, tie hanging limp around his neck, looking utterly helpless. "Seriously, you can't even tie your tie? What did you do before we got married?" "Mommy always did it," he replied sheepishly. With a deep exhale, I tied his tie, and somehow we both managed to leave the house. This had become our routine. He never helped with any housework, and it felt like I was juggling everything while babysitting him too. Every time an issue arose, it was always, "Mommy did it this way," or "With Mommy, it went like that," always referencing his mother, Michelle. This pattern dragged on for a year, and as the pressures mounted, thoughts of divorce began to creep into my mind. My father's insistence that marriage is forever echoed in my thoughts, tempering my frustrations. However, an unexpected hiccup at work led to a week-long business trip starting the next day. When I broke the news to my husband that evening, he paused his video game, clearly surprised. "Hold up, a business trip for a whole week? It's out of my hands. Work's calling, I explained. No way. Who's going to cover for you here for a week? He asked, irritation creeping into his voice. You'll have to step up. It's about time you got a grip on the household duties. I responded, and he set down his controller, locking eyes with me. Isn't the wife supposed to care for her husband in the house? Are you just bailing on that? His question was steeped in outdated expectations. Seriously, that's such old school thinking. We both have jobs. We should be a team, I countered. That's not how I see it. Mommy was always on top of things at home, he retorted. I couldn't help but point out, but she was a stay-at-home mom. Honestly, it's kind of odd hearing an adult man constantly talk about mommy. He bristled at my words. What's your deal? Taking shots at me and my mommy? I'm not, but let's be real. You're a mama's boy. This is how you see me. You think you can talk to me like that? His defensiveness escalated, and I felt my frustration peak. Face it, you're a mama's boy. You can't get up without help. You can't even tie your tie. And you won't lift a finger around the house. You're constantly comparing me to your mom. For once, handle your stuff. Really? You're going to come at me like that? That's why I was iffy about marrying someone older. Should have sided with mommy and chosen a younger, perkier girl, he shot back. His words struck a nerve, and our conversation spiraled into a major blowout. Even joking, you shouldn't say stuff like that. We're married, I said, trying to anchor the conversation to the commitment we had made to each other. The tension was palpable, revealing the deep rifts that had formed in our relationship. When my husband hinted at divorce during our heated argument, I was taken aback. With a smug tone, he challenged, You can't possibly want a divorce, can you? You wouldn't want to be labeled divorced. And think about what your dad said about sticking together. Then, with a sharp edge, he added, Well, I just did. If you go on this business trip and leave me here alone, I'm seriously considering a divorce. With those words, he stormed off to our bedroom, leaving me stunned. Despite the shock, the idea of divorce lingered in my mind, a thought I had previously wrestled with, fearing I would disappoint my parents. But now it seemed like a viable option to consider seriously. Heavy with these thoughts, I went to bed. The next day, I woke early to prepare for my trip. The fallout from our argument still weighed heavily on me, but I had work commitments to attend to. I nudged Edward, who was still curled up under the covers. I'm heading out. You better wake up or you'll be late for work. His response was a sleepy mumble, unintelligible and dismissive. Rolling my eyes, I left. A few hours later, a text from him popped up on my phone. You barely tried to wake me. Now I'm running late. Did you really go on that trip? I quickly replied, I did wake you up, and yes, I'm on my trip. I'll be back in a week. He read my message but didn't reply. Mid-trip, I decided to call my parents to update them on Edward's behavior and share my growing inclination toward divorce. I braced myself for a lecture, unsure how they would react to the possibility of our marriage ending. The call was going to be difficult, but I needed their advice and support. Their response took me by surprise. We had no idea he behaved like this. Take your time to think, but don't force yourself to stay in a situation that isn't right. Always remember, we're in your corner, no matter what you decide. Their words of unconditional support brought tears to my eyes. Upon returning from my business trip, I felt a mix of clarity and determination. I knew a serious conversation with Edward was inevitable. If he didn't show any signs of change, I was ready to consider divorce more seriously. My mind buzzed with thoughts as I walked into our house late in the evening, only to find Edward wasn't home yet. As I looked around, a set of signed divorce papers and a note on the table caught my attention. The note read, Since you ditched the housework, I'm heading back to my folks. Check out the divorce papers and think things over. My initial reaction was rage. How dared he threaten me with divorce? But as my anger subsided, I began to see the situation differently. Maybe this was a sign that ending things might not be such a bad idea after all. With that realization, I decided to file the papers. When the divorce was finalized, I felt a heavy weight lift from my shoulders. That evening, I went to bed and slept more soundly than I had in a long time. The next morning, as I enjoyed a peaceful cup of coffee, the door swung open and in walked Edward, clearly upset. Why didn't you come to my parents' place to apologize? What's gotten into you? He demanded, his temper flaring. Then, noticing the empty spot where the divorce papers had been, his expression shifted from anger to shock. Hold on, where are the divorce papers? Oh, I filed them, I replied calmly. You did what? He looked as if he had been slapped. You went through with it. Thanks for signing them. It made everything smoother, I said, trying to keep my composure. You can't be serious. Did you really go all the way? Have you lost your mind? He exclaimed, unable to hide his astonishment at my decisiveness. Seeing how composed I remained sent him into a complete frenzy. That's it. I'm calling my parents. Sure, knock yourself out, I replied, unfazed by his threat. I knew I had made the right decision for myself. An hour after the confrontation, I felt a sense of clarity settling in. When Edward's parents, Michelle and Arthur, arrived at our apartment, Michelle immediately spotted me and dramatically exclaimed, You! How could you just divorce Edward like that? What's wrong with you? I replied coolly, if he had the divorce papers all filled out and ready to go, doesn't that suggest he wanted out? Is that a problem? How can you be so bold when you're just his wife? She shot back. Before the situation could escalate, Arthur intervened, his voice firm. Enough. The room fell silent as he turned to me. Grace, can you walk us through what happened? I agreed and began to detail the ongoing issues, our argument before my trip, and the divorce papers Edward had left for me. I was at my wit's end. It seemed like he wanted a divorce, so I went with it. I maintained eye contact with Arthur, hoping to convey the depth of my frustration. Just as I finished, Edward interjected, Mom, Dad, come on, can't you see she's out of line? Tell her off. Michelle quickly sided with Edward. Oh, Edward, my poor baby, she's being so hasty. You should reverse the divorce right now. There's no reversing it. Our divorce is final. We're strangers now, I stated firmly. Michelle's face turned red, and she opened her mouth to respond. But once again, Arthur cut her off. Zip it, Michelle. He then turned to me, apologizing for Edward's behavior. Then facing Edward, whose eyes were wide with surprise, Arthur continued, You bonehead. I knew you had issues, but this, using divorce papers as a threat, unbelievable. You had it coming. Michelle tried to interject, but Arthur wouldn't let up. It's partly on you, Michelle. You spoiled him. Watch out. If you keep this up, I might divorce you too. The tension in the room was palpable as Arthur confronted the reality of the situation, leaving Edward and Michelle speechless. After the intense discussion, Michelle appeared visibly shaken, her mind lingering on Arthur's unexpected threat of divorce. She murmured to herself, troubled. Arthur then turned his attention back to me, his expression marked by sincere regret. Grace, I deeply regret the trouble our clueless son has caused you. It's clear he has a lot to learn. Please move on and find happiness in your life, Arthur implored, his concern genuine. I thanked Arthur for his understanding and watched as he left, taking a dejected Edward with him. It didn't take long for the news to spread through our circle. Arthur had decided to sever financial and emotional ties with Edward, a drastic move aimed at pushing him towards self-sufficiency. Soon after, Edward's life spiraled downward. He moved into a modest, somewhat neglected apartment, his first experience living truly on his own. The transition was anything but smooth. His new home quickly descended into chaos, mirroring his disorganized personal life. With no one to rely on and a habit of tardiness, he soon found himself unemployed, unable to adhere to a schedule. Meanwhile, the dynamics within his family deteriorated further. Michelle, who had always meddled in Edward's affairs, crossed boundaries one too many times, resulting in a serious fallout with Arthur. This ultimately led to their separation. Michelle moved in with Edward, and together they struggled to find stability, scraping by with low-end jobs. Their lives became a series of unfortunate events and poor decisions with no clear path to improvement. In stark contrast, my life took a different turn. Free from the daily stresses and emotional drain of my relationship with Edward, I found myself alone in our condo, which now felt surprisingly spacious and full of potential. With renewed energy and focus, I dedicated myself to my career. The absence of Edward's negative influence allowed me to excel at work, and my professional life flourished as a result. Feeling liberated and optimistic, I embraced my newfound independence. My living space transformed into a true sanctuary where I could relax and plan for the future. The improvement in my work life was palpable. Each day brought a sense of excitement and anticipation for what lay ahead. The contrast between my thriving existence and Edward and Michelle's downward trajectory was stark. While they were no longer a part of my life, the lessons learned from our time together resonated deeply, reinforcing my commitment to personal growth and happiness.